Welcome back to the Open Up podcast, everyone, and to episode 58 with former AFL player with the Carlton FC and now Australian Mental Health Prize nominee and founder of Outside the Locker Room, brother Jake Edwards. Thank you for taking time to do this.
Oh, thanks for having me, mate. Looking forward to having a chat. Terrific thing you've done. Well done.
Straight into it, can you give the people out there who aren't aware of Outside the Locker Room a quick breakdown of what that is?
Absolutely, yeah. And once again, mate, thanks for the opportunity. And we took us a while to get here, but I apologise for the delay. But we finally found time, mate. It's really important, so I appreciate it, your patience. And look, Outside the Locker Room is a byproduct of my personal lived experience with mental health. I think behind every non-for-profit or great initiative, there's always a reason as to why they get started, and OTLR is no different. And I was the sixth player in my family to play elite football, AFL football. Wow. So it's a big pedigree in footy. So growing up, it was a big part of my life. And, at the age of 16, I wanted to become an AFL player. And at the age of 17, 4 weeks out of year 12, I was drafted to the Carlton Football Club. Still very young, very raw. Really just excited to get into playing something I've dreamt of my entire life. And I got that opportunity, and a couple of years into my career, everything was going along really well. I was working hard, I was driven, I was everything that I guess a young man would aspires to become as an athlete. And I had a few things going on the outside, however, just weren't making sense. And I had people giving their opinions on myself. As great as that pedigree with football is, my family, people thought that was the only reason I was playing football. And it created a bit of a chip on my shoulder, and it just really, really upset me very early on. And I spent the first few years of my life as a footballer trying to impress everyone and try and worry about everyone else's opinions. And I was driven to prove a lot of people wrong. And during that process, I felt like I lost a big part of who I was as a young male, and identified myself with only becoming a footballer. And I know now, that's not the right way to go about things. There's more to life, and as a young man, as playing football. So I started going through quite symptomatic issues with depression. And at that time, I hadn't known any idea. I never heard of the word depression before. And, where this is 12 years ago now when I was going through this. So we've come a long way as an industry. We know more about it now, but 12 years ago in an industry where it's all about male dominance and pride and ego and all those type of things, it was quite scary, to be honest with you, mate. It was getting out of bed was a really hard thing to do. And I know that some of us find it hard to bounce out of bed some mornings because it might be cold or no motivation, things like that. And that's what I thought it kind of was. It'd just go through it and come out the other end and everything would be okay. But it just got worse and harder over time. And I'd be crying on into my bed because of the emotional roller coaster that I was just experiencing. And the frustration is that I have these thoughts of, I should be bouncing out of bed. I'm an AFL player. I've got all the money. I've just bought a house. I had everything in my life was perfect, but I just couldn't put my finger on why am I feeling really upset and sad, and why am I crying on the end of my bed. I mean, telling myself things like, stop being a sook and harden up, and, get over it and move on and stuff like that. And when you tell yourself that story over and over and again, you build some resilience around your own emotional well-being and intuition. And I just enabled myself to keep going and try and push through it. And by the end of my third year of my career, it all just became too much. I'd held on to it for too long, and it got worse and worse. And I was having anxiety attacks to the point where I couldn't drive my car anymore, because my hands wouldn't close, so I couldn't hold the steering wheel. And I'd be on the side of the road, and I have mum on the phone. I'd be talking to her, and I'd just be an emotional wreck. And I'd be 20 minutes before I had to be at training, and in front of these other teammates of mine that are absolute, role models in AFL football, and thinking to myself, surely these guys go through something like this, or is it just me? And you have all these things going through your head, and I just continued to really just squash it. And by the end of that third year, I had a meltdown. I had a bad game of football one day, and it all just became too much. And I quit footy and went back home to the farm and sat around a table with mum and dad. And my old man's very much an old school kind of guy as well. Grew up in the farming area in Victoria, and he's very, very hard growing up. Yep. I'd say intimidating, but we all loved him. We all got along. But he, talking about your feelings around the table wasn't something that you kind of did, and you just got on with things. And my fear was is that if I said something to Dad at that time, that he would just tell me to harden up and stop being soft, and get on with it and so forth. And to my surprise, my dad handled the conversation really different. And it's probably a good testament to people listening to this podcast, mate, about the role that our friends and family can play, approaching the conversation in a really compassionate, caring manner, without any judgment, or you don't need to know all the answers. But the way that my father handled it, he leaned his chair in, he put his arm around me, in a really compassionate way. He just said, mate, look, what's going on? You've just quit football. Something's not right. And just with him doing that, I just opened the floodgates, He just started talking about it. And then, I start bawling my eyes out. My old man starts crying as well. And my mum, she's crying. And it really galvanized a few things of what I was going through. And off the back of that, I went back to the football club because I had another year to go on my contract. And I was diagnosed with depression from the doctor at the time. And I remember I was 19, going through this stage, and just turned 20. And when I was diagnosed, being diagnosed is one thing, but really trying to understand it, I guess, or the care to want to learn about it, was a fault of mine. Like I was naive and I was ignorant, and I thought I could pop some pills every day and things would be fine. I could get on with it, becoming a footballer, and, just being very stupid and ignorant to mental health and the illness itself. And I started taking these pills every day, mate. I didn't ask the doctors any questions about it. I didn't want anyone else outside my family to know about it. I didn't want my teammates to know about it. It was easy for me to just pop a pill and just try and move forward. And I started using football, I guess, as my first addiction. And that's what really, because when I was playing and training football, my life outside didn't exist. And that was something that I gravitated towards, because these pills weren't doing their job, in my opinion. They weren't doing it quick enough. I thought they were placebos. I was just young and stupid, really. And I abused the medication and really abused the plan of getting back on track with my own wellness and my own mental health. And football played that role for me for that fourth year of my career. And unfortunately, when my career had come to an end, it wasn't on my terms. And that was a really difficult period for me to lose football as a professional, and then trying to transition back into everyday life, I guess. And it's not about poor footballer's story. It's more about the routine and the structure, and that for those people who go through mental health illness can really associate with just trying to get out of bed at the same time every day can be a challenge. So it's that routine that you really rely on, and then when you lose that, a big part of me had gone with that, and I wasn't a footballer anymore, and I didn't have any career ambition behind me, and it was easier for me to kind of run away, because that pedigree of football is good, but I felt like I let my family down because I didn't become that 100-game AFL player and all that type of stuff like all my family members had. And it was easy for me to run away and abuse alcohol, and that became my coping mechanism over the journey. And then that led me down a path, mate, of drug abuse. And unfortunately, that that really just whipped me up, took control. Early on, it was just something that I thought I could just do it and move on and get a job and things would be fine and no big deal. And I was anti-drugs and really my whole life, and I'd never taken one until 2011. And then off the back of that, it just kind of the next 2 years of my life, it really just took hold of me. And unfortunately, it all kind of come together. You mixed the mental health illness I was experiencing, still the running away, and the didn't want to confront a lot of things in my life. And that's not just mental health. That's just me as a person and where I was at. That ripped family away, because obviously I wasn't in a good headspace, and pushed family and friends away, stopped going to birthdays and Christmases and stuff like that, and started hanging around some really pretty poor people in those environments, and just ripped money out of my life. And at one point, I think it was about 3.5 years post my career, I had 45 cents to my name. So I was going through a really difficult phase, and it was easy for me to just keep running, mate. And it led me to it all just come together with everything that I've just mentioned. And I had a girlfriend at the time, and she was my last lifeline. She was keeping me stable in some way, and she got wind of everything that was going on with the alcohol and the drugs, and then she just walked out one night and she couldn't do it anymore. And And off the back of that, mate, I went out and partied for 4 days straight and come home. And on a Monday morning, my bathroom in Port Melbourne was when I attempted my own life. In my bathroom. And fortunately, that I'm still here, and I know people listening don't have that luxury, perhaps with loved ones who have been really affected by the ripple effect of suicide in our communities. And off the back of that, mate, I had the opportunity to restart my life, and spent time in a program working with some really important clinicians and psychiatry, and had the opportunity to invest in myself again. Because for those that have been survivors of suicide, the sense that I got post that experience was like a peeled onion, like I had no more layers to me. I had nothing, I couldn't hide anything more. Yep. Because you're at your complete lowest, and I felt like I couldn't have gone any lower. And you can't hide behind the bullshit anymore. You can't manipulate anymore. You can't do anything. You're there naked. And off the back of that I took the opportunity to really use that to catapult me into a better lifestyle, well-being, and and so forth. And a couple of things that happened immediately after the attempt that really motivated me to get some change. And off the back of those two things, that in fact, the reason why I wanted to create change for me so much wasn't for me; it was for my family, and that was enough for me to get in and see the right people. So through that experience, mate, I come out about 12 months later, and the opportunity to set up something as outside the locker room as it is now, it all came to fruition. And I set up a program, mate, 4.5 years ago, in country Victoria, just 14, 15 sporting clubs. And over the last, couple of years, we've worked with it's about 180 now, I think, sporting clubs and schools across Australia. And it's just been something that's just taken me on a really positive journey, and something that I think, looking back then, I didn't expect perhaps how big a need there was for it.
Yeah.
Until you get into it and start doing it, you realise pretty quickly that there are a lot of people out there, mate, that are going through some similar things. So I hope that answers your question. It's a long answer, but it's certainly you can't kind of answer it without the whole backstory.
Yeah.
And our locker room, mate, is what it is today. It's a welfare and education program. We work alongside sporting clubs and schools, offering a platform of support for players and families, a part of our sporting clubs. They can reach out and get some help through our welfare platform. So we have a welfare team, like counselling and psychology, in place that we offer free support through that. But we also offer an education program. So we roll out 2 visits per sporting club or school per year. And we touch on mental health, drugs and alcohol, gambling, domestic violence. We cover a wide range of different topics now. But it's just, in our opinion, we feel that sport's a terrific vehicle in the community. That doesn't matter your religion, your gender, your age, your sexual preference. It brings everyone together, and sport's a terrific vehicle to be able to support and communicate these important topics. So
that's awesome, man. That's pretty powerful that you've turned a story like that into something so profound and so impactful in a positive way.
Yeah, thanks, mate. It's like I said, it's been a journey. One thing that my psychiatrist had taught me, actually, off the back of everything I'd went through, was the blueprint that he's very absolutely stereotyping here. It's probably not right of me to say it, because I know not everyone probably can understand it or get it. But as an athlete, what we have is that when it comes to commitment, dedication, hard work, all these things and values and that, we know very, very well. And what my psychiatrist had taught me, that for such a period of time, I'd been doing the exact same effort into unresourceful things, like alcohol and drug abuse. It just happened so quickly and so dominant in my life because I invested everything into it. And then the minute he taught me about that mindset and what he would call the athletic blueprint, was more around me better understanding that I can actually take this and put it into something really positive, and it can actually manifest quite quickly if I commit the same effort that I do to that, to addiction, for example. So it's all happened quite quick, but it's certainly something that I am proud of. There's no doubt. Yeah.
That's a really cool insight, man. I've never heard anyone sort of spin that athletic drive like that.
Yeah, I was shocked, mate, when he told me. I'm like, hang on a minute. So you're telling me that I can turn shit around pretty quickly? And he's like, yeah, mate, absolutely, you can. And it's funny because one day he came into, I had a session with him, and he came into to the room, and I was sitting on a chair, and he had a book, all right, so like a novel. and he put the book down in front of me, and I was at a stage where I was coming out the back about 4 weeks into the process, and I'm in a really kind of infant stage. My mind is really all over the joint, and he as soon as he put the book down, I can remember thinking to myself, "Oh, fuck, here we go. He's going to get me to read books. This is just going to be a typical clinical type of thing." And my mind just kept going and going and going. Oh, this chatter. And then halfway through him talking, I interrupted him and said, "Mate, what's this book about?" Because it just pissed me off that much that he put a book in front of me, and I was just in a really bad headspace. And I'll never forget it. He stopped talking. He looked at me. He kind of had a bit of a grin on his face, and he goes, "Oh, look, I know you're an athlete and you're a footballer and you probably don't read books and all this type of stuff." And he goes, "Well, in fact, I don't think you can read it, but, I want you to try and walk away and try and read this book." And the minute he said to me, "I don't think you can read it," my mind just completely went off the chart, just completely jumped down his throat. So what are you saying? I can't read a book. And the best lesson he taught me was just how reactive I was to people and everyone.
Yeah.
So I remember I grabbed the book, I stood up and I stormed out, and I come back the next couple of days. I'd read the book twice. I had notes. And when I walked in and sat down in the chair, the next time I seen him, he starts laughing, and he taught me very early straight away that he manipulated me. So what he said to me is, he goes, "Mate, if I'd have told you that here's a book, go away and read it, you reckon you would have read it?" And I said, "Oh, probably not. I would have made some bullshit story up." And he goes, "No." He goes, "I had to find what makes you tick. And what makes me tick is saying that I can't do something, no one's going to do it or you can't do it." So he knew that by saying to me, "Mate, I don't think you can read this book," that I was going to go away and do something about it. And it taught me that I actually take control of my outcomes, and in between my ears was my biggest victim.
Yeah.
It was my biggest challenge, was that voice. So I had to come to terms with how to handle that and cope with that.
Well, yeah, and using, I guess, trying to prove people wrong doesn't always work in the end, because if you're trying to prove someone wrong, then you end up becoming something that you're not.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, exactly right. And also, proving people wrong is, and what I learned was it's an okay thing, but your motivations behind it need to be in line with your values. So I didn't understand the concept between what was resourceful and unresourceful. Someone said, "You can't scull that beer of alcohol," or whatever it is, and that's like, bullshit, watch me, compared to, you can't set up a program that can get across Australia to 200 sporting clubs. You know what I mean? It's it's the same mindset, but it's just one's a really good thing to do and one's clearly not a good thing to do. But it was a good learning curve, absolutely, and it's probably what set me up. Yeah.
Cool. I think just want to ask you about your childhood, knowing that you've had so many family members who've been footy players as well. Was there ever any pressure from the family, from mum and dad, to be one of those footy players?
Yeah, I think it was always there. It certainly wasn't. It wasn't in your face or anything like that. But I remember. I'll give you an example of kind of what it was like. So I'm the youngest of three sons, and my middle brother was actually the best footballer out of all of us. But he didn't play AFL football. At the age of 17, he got a pretty bad injury, but he started hanging around the wrong people. So I'd seen that firsthand and said to myself, "Radio, that's what not to do. Do the complete opposite, and you got a good chance." So I wasn't the best footballer getting around, but I worked my ass off, and that's what separated me from most. But growing up, my father was pretty critical. I'd play games of football when I'd come home, and I'd be like, "Oh, I kicked 2 goals," and my dad would be, "Yeah, but you missed 4." You know what I mean? So it was always that constant kind of, is this guy ever going to be happy? Will I ever play the best football in his eyes? And that was Dad just trying to be a good dad. And his father, my grandfather, was very much the same. He wanted the best for all of us kids, and he was quite critical as well. But back then, mate, it was kind of more acceptable, I think, that behaviour, where today we know it's a tiny bit different. And I remember one day sitting in my bedroom, my dad walks in, and my dad's a plumber as well. So add to the stereotype of who he is. He walks in, and I had to pick between football and cricket because I just got picked to play for Victoria in both sports, and I was always going to pick footy. But Dad walks in, he goes to me, "Son, you can't keep playing both sports. You got to make your mind up. Your mum's driving you everywhere. It's now time where you got to pick." And I said, okay, Dad, I'll have a think about it. I'll get back to you, and I'll let you guys know. He's like, okay, great. But what have you picked? Your mother and I support you 100%. And I was lucky, mate. I grew up in a really good household, loving, caring. We had a lot. So Dad turned around, went to walk out of the bedroom, and he stopped and he paused and he turned around and he looked at me and he goes to me, but you know the family history in footy, don't you? As a bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of sly comment as he left the room, and he gave a bit of smile too as he left. But that's where I guess it kind of hit me that, geez, I'm a last chance here to extend the family name in football. And look, honestly, mate, I could have been a builder, I could have been a hockey player, or whatever it was. My mum and dad and family would have been great, but I think I'd be kidding myself if I said that there wasn't pressure. Yeah, growing up. Whether that was then from them, bits and pieces, it was more through language and conversation. It wasn't direct. Like for example, like around the Christmas, lunch, for example, you'd be sitting around talking about footy and stuff like that. You get that sense of expectation, but you'd for probably more than myself personally, like I wanted to become that next player.
Yeah.
And that's where that probably a lot of that anxiety was driven from such a young age.
Cool. And I think you spoke about like how your dad would react to you kicking goals.
Yep.
Sort of like highlighting what you didn't do, knowing how hard you worked and eventually getting yourself to a point where you're drafted. Did you start to feel like you were good enough then? Because I can imagine like you go away, you have a good game, you come back and you get told it still wasn't enough. That would have been hard for someone working so hard.
Yeah, it is, because like I said, you can't help but think that, am I ever going to be good enough? Is there ever going to be a perfect game? Because there were times over the journey, mate, where you get squashed pretty quickly, and that wasn't just my dad either. Look, I played back. I was drafted 2005, so I guess the techniques of coaching back then were a lot different to what they are today, and they told you pretty much straight up whether or not you're going all right, and if they thought that you're getting ahead of yourself, that they'd pull you down pretty quickly, and that was part of it kind of back then, and you can't help but think that I can't do this, or I'm not good enough, or all those type of things, and it's difficult for me to look at over my journey and not have some thought coming in saying, well, I'm glad in a way I had to endure that, those kind of comments and those behaviours at such a young age, because maybe it built a little bit of prick in me. You know what I mean? To want to drive so much, to want to try and really succeed in whatever it was, and obviously I allowed myself to get to a point where it could have been a moment of not here or here based on the suicide attempt, but off the back of that, I really think that I've called upon a lot of my experiences of resilience, if you want to call it, to really help me drive forward with everything else. So I'm grateful for a lot of things that I went through, as much as I wish I had changed a lot of different things as well.
Yeah, of course. Or you've taken all your lessons and spun them into something positive. So I can definitely understand that. Knowing like how hard you worked to become this footy player, do you think you were striving for what you like genuinely wanted yourself, or do you think it was a mixture of like you wanting that because you wanted to prove people wrong?
Yeah, it's a great question. I probably don't get asked that one enough, man, because I think about it quite a bit. I think people look at my journey and see AFL player, now mental health advocate, and there's a lot of things leading up to it where I felt like that it's probably two parts of it. I felt I played AFL football obviously because it was a big part of my young adulthood growing up.
Yeah.
So I was always probably influenced to become an AFL player by family, and I think there was certain parts of me throughout my career where I felt like that I wasn't happy, and this might sound really kind of interesting, but I always felt that even during my AFL career that I didn't really belong, and it wasn't really I never felt safe. I never felt secure. And maybe that was part of the mental health experience that I was going through, because I was so insecure and unsure about my own well-being. But I never felt like this is perhaps how I'm going to be known for forever. And now when I look back and I talk about playing AFL football. I've played in front of nearly 90,000 people in the MCG, and I always thought growing up that would be my greatest achievement. They'd be on top of the list, and that's me, and that's me as a person. But obviously, the work that I do today and the work that we both know that we work in, it's like there's fifth or sixth on the list. There's 4 or 5 things above that are far more rewarding. So I feel like I was influenced to a point, and I felt like that perhaps maybe my decisions were made when I thought they were me making them, but really I think there was an underlying issue of this is what you kind of have to do. But during my career, man, I never really felt that, this is kind of me.
Looking back now, do you have an understanding of why? Obviously, it's hard at the time, especially when you don't understand mental health. But looking back now, do you know?
Yeah, not really. I think there's a combination of different things. One, I was so young. So I was 17 when I was playing AFL football. I was only 4 weeks out of year 12. So emotionally, I was still developing as a young male. Trying to fit in, be accepted. I never had issues with that as a young man at school. I was always quite popular and got along with everyone. Had no issues at school, but I found that transition into becoming an AFL player, perhaps even a young male, probably too early, was quite frustrating.
Yeah.
And you combine that with the mental health experience that I was at the time going through, and I felt like I had to be probably put on a bit of a mask and a bit of a facade and try and become someone a lot earlier than what I probably that I probably was. My 2 older brothers call me the youngest older brother, only because I felt like because my old man and that kicked me out of home, and I was drafted and said, you got to go live on your own now and go live your own life. So you learn how to wash your clothes and make your bed pretty quickly. So I feel like there's probably a wide range of different things, mate, that came in all at the one time, which perhaps even isolation. I felt like I had good teammates at the football club, but I never ever felt I had best mate at the football club, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I always just kind of felt a little bit kind of isolated from the group, and I think that was probably me doing it as subconsciously because I didn't want kind of anyone to know me crying on my bed at home, for example. So I think there's a combination, man, of a few different things there.
Cool. Did you feel like you deserved to be in that position
as an AFL player? Yeah, I did. I did because when I got drafted, like I said before, I really had worked my bum off, and I wasn't the best player getting around. So when I was drafted, I was extremely proud of my ability to get there. But when I was first drafted, my last name being Edwards, and with it being a good pedigree with football, like I said earlier, I had people on the outside looking in saying, "Oh, you're only drafted because of your last name. You're only drafted because of who your dad is and your pop is and stuff like that." And that did really upset me. But I felt that I deserved to be there. But the problem was is that I felt like I needed to show everyone else that that I do deserve to be here. And during that process, I lost a big part of who I generally was growing up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sad, man. I think you talked about like when you first, I guess, realized the signs of what you now know as depression when you're going through it, and you said it was scary.
Yeah.
Were you able to talk to anyone about that, or was that just something you internalized and held inside?
Yeah, I didn't talk to anyone immediately. So at the time I was going through, I had a girlfriend at the time, and we had just bought a house together. And so just as a way of me getting out of bed and not getting out of bed, I'd be sitting on the end of my bed and I'd be in tears in my training gear before I had to get off to go to training. And that my girlfriend would obviously she'd be sitting next to me trying to help me and trying to get me to talk about what's going on. But mate, the scarcity around it, the frustration and the confusion, I just acted like most young men do, and that is get angry, and pissed off. And I just tell her to don't worry about it and I'll be fine, and grab my footy bag and just throw it in the car and just storm off down the road. And that's kind of as much as in-depth conversation that I had around it.
Yeah. And
from then till when I got home was a good 6 hours. So I'd come home and completely close off as if the morning never happened. So we never spoke about it. But the only other person I spoke to about it was my mum. So there's conversations on the phone.
Yeah.
And what we would do is that, because I was very close to my mum growing up, and I still am. And mum and I would have conversations. So the two big things that I was trying to get my head around were not getting out of bed, and why am I crying? And what that come down to me is that I'm tired. So the way that I'd validate that is that I'd make an excuse up or a reason as to why that is, and I'd say to myself, well, I'm training really hard, I'm working my ass off, because I was. So that's why I'm tired. That's why I don't want to get out of bed. So I justify it, and I go, okay, that's okay. And then the next thing that was frustrating was the anxiety, because I'd experience pressure, but not physical, emotional anxiety. And so I'd say to myself, okay, well, you know what, Jake, you're an AFL player, mate, and playing in front of 80,000 people is a high pressure environment, and I just had to say to myself, mate, you just got to come to terms with the fact that this is just playing AFL football and this is just normal. And I'd say to myself that, surely Chris Judd or Brendan Favola go through these things themselves. And these are the two things that I'd say to myself, the stories that I'd say. And my mum and I would have these conversations, and mum not knowing anything about it either. She'd just try and get the best for her son and try and support me through that conversation and say, look, you'll be fine. It's okay. It gets better. You'll get through this and so forth. And so that's what I do, mate, is get off the training and then just try and get on with it. So my partner at the time and my mum were the two people that I would talk about it, but we'd come up with stories that would almost validate that, that it's going to get easier. And it never did. Yeah.
Well, I guess for most people, even just talking about that sort of stuff would be hard to, like, their mother, let alone their partner. Was that something you were brought up with? Being able to, like, share how you're feeling?
Yeah. Once again, with my mum, I was really good because between me and my middle brother, there's 4-year difference. Mm-hmm. And when my middle brother was 18, he's able to drive his car. At the time, I was only 13, turning 14. So mum and I were together all the time. So she'd go pick me up from school, take me to training, bring me home from training. I could count on one game on my hand, mate, the amount of games of football that my mum has not been to in my entire career. So my mum's always been there for me. And driving in the car everywhere from home from school, like I remember the first time I had my heart broken at school. And I'd come out of the school. It was about 20 minutes after the bell had gone. She'd broken up with me. I'm crying, walking out of the high school, and I hop in the car and because we live on a farm. So we drive from school all the way back home to the farm. And I'd be crying as you normally do in year 7. And I remember as we pulled up on the farm, my old man was there because being a plumber. My 2 older brothers just started working for my dad as a plumber. And every Friday they'd sit out the front and have a few beers and stuff like that. And I said to mum, don't say anything to dad. Don't let anyone know what's happened. Really trying to toughen up, and try and suck it in a little bit more. So mum and I were very open and transparent around a lot of things. So I think that's gone through my life, right through to today, just because we had that not forced relationship, but, mum was everywhere when I was little.
Yeah.
So we always had that dialogue with mum as well. But the frustrating thing, mate, for me is looking back that journey post my career when I went through, the abuse and the addiction and stuff like that. And at any given time, mate, I could have just reached out to mum. I could have spoken to my father. I could have reached out to my 2 brothers who were great role models. We're like best mates. And I could have easily got some help, but I didn't do that. And I allowed that ego, that pride and that thing. I couldn't let my mum possibly think that a little boy was failing. I couldn't let dad think that, that his youngest boy isn't coping. And same thing, I didn't want my brothers to worry about me because they had their own lives going on, mate. They were getting married and stuff like that. So it was just a really bullshit excuse that I told myself for such a period of time that, no one needs to worry. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want people to worry about. I can do this. I can get through this. And eventually, mate, it got to a point as it did. So if a few things I changed, I just would have done more earlier because I knew all the signs, but I couldn't come to terms with the fact that I was struggling.
And the hardest thing about being in that position, especially if you're like abusing drugs or alcohol, is that you shouldn't be doing that. And so you more than likely feel like a fraud or don't like yourself for the actions or the behavior that you're engaging in. So why
Yeah,
would anyone else like you?
that's right. You're embarrassed. Like I've grown up in a proud family. I mean, well, fucking hell, like, what's my old man going to think of me if he knows I'm snorting cocaine most mornings? Like it's not something that you're proud of. But yet, on the other hand, it's something that you're so reliant on because when I was using, everything was fine. I wasn't still enough to think about my shitty life. I was high most of the time, and those environments were uplifting. And a lot of the time, mate, some of the stories that I've got still today are some of the funniest, most outrageous things that I've ever been through those environments. And it's really conflicting sometimes when you think about it and you look back at the times and you think, I can understand why people who go through addiction and that that conflict that they have around the embarrassment. And with my family, as you've already learned, as proud as it is through sport, I didn't want to be that druggy football family dude, So it was, that's a lot of that was deep in me. So that's what held me back from getting any help,
Man, that's a lot to take on. Well, that's a lot to keep inside.
Yeah, it is. And it breaks away at you, mate. And that's what it did. I thought that I could cope. I thought that it gets better. It's going to get easier. I just thought that I could stop using and things would be fine. And I mean, the drug abuse stuff really kicked in really strongly, over a good 4 to 6 months, mate. It just went from me using for the first time to buying bricks of cocaine, to live off almost. And it just went so fast. And it was just such a really interesting experience to have to live, but also people around me, like my best mate, who's still my best mate today, he sat me down on 2 occasions and looked me eye to eye and said, mate, you got to get help. Like, I'm all about partying and having fun and stuff. He goes, mate, but you're next level. Like, you're not right. Something's wrong. But I just lied to him, manipulated him, told him I would, and blah, 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 and just got around the conversation, mate, and just kept avoiding everything. So it's not like people weren't trying to help. I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's profound, man. I guess I just want to go back to a few things that you mentioned. You mentioned about like being this AFL player and having that paradox of being somewhere where you envisioned yourself yet not being happy, and like this I should be happy sort of internal conflict. What are the lessons you've taken away from that? Because obviously being an Aussie, most kids would dream of being in that position, yet you weren't happy.
Yeah, I think it's just a great lesson, isn't it? I think sometimes we think we know what we want, and then sometimes when we get there, we realise pretty quickly that it's not probably what it's all made out to be. And one thing I've probably learned from that, mate, is to have different avenues of different plans and that come up along the way. So, obviously outside the locker room now is something I'm very passionate about. It's something I've been doing for 4.5 years, and for me, it's all about outweighing, purpose through to, say, financial gain, for example. And I'm all about giving of service, giving back, and it makes me feel better. It's quite selfish, but the work that I do every single day, I will come home feeling better. And that's a good lesson that I took away from my experience with AFL football, is that I was doing something that I dreamt my entire life, but I was coming home and I was miserable. And yes, there were triggers with my depression, but I certainly feel elements of football brought that out in me, because whether it was football or something else, I think it would have come to the surface at some point, but it certainly brought it to the surface a lot sooner, perhaps, on what I thought it was. And the other thing as well, mate, outside of locker room, I've got other interests. If outside locker room doesn't always go to plan, things come up and things really annoy me, things that frustrate me. All those things come with it. So I've got things on the outside now. So I've just started a clothing label, which is a good creative element. It's not an exercise to make money on. It's more that creative element that I really enjoy getting involved in. And as I mentioned before, we spoke about, those coping mechanisms and stuff like that. So I've learned that outside of what you think you need to create to help drive that, perhaps you need other influences in other areas to inspire yourself to stay motivated. And that's what all different elements of my life today has done. And probably something I learned from my football career, because I put all my eggs in that basket to becoming an AFL player. And when it didn't work. I think the average now is just under 4 years as an AFL player, so it's not what people make it out to be. It's not a lifelong career as a school teacher or a doctor or anything like that. It's something that can be here 1 second, gone the next, and having a backup plan is not necessarily a bad idea.
Yeah, exactly, man. One other thing you mentioned was like the first time, I guess, when you quit football and you're worried about the way your dad would react. Yep. Obviously, a kid coming home from school crying about heartbreak, not wanting his dad to know. Like, how has that changed your relationship, and what would be like the lesson for anyone who's nervous about opening up to someone who's so close?
Yeah, so growing up, my father and I, we always had a good, respected relationship. He was very tough. Growing up on a farm is you got to work around the farm, so he was quite tough. But when I went through the attempt and come out the other end, I actually, part of my rehab process was making that relationship with my father better. And what I had to do was that I had to actually get to know my dad as a mate, not as a father. Yeah. And they're two really different relationships. And what I had learnt during that process, two things. One, that my dad was just trying to be the best father that he possibly could when I was growing up, even though at the time I wanted to strangle him and fight with him all the time. But because that's just kind of the relationship that we had. But he was just trying to do the best he could. And his dad, who's my grandfather, was that's how he fathered him growing up. So once I got my head around that, there's a lot of stuff that left me and I was happy with. And the other part of it as well, mate, which was I found extremely ironic, was that for nearly 20 odd years of my father's life, he's experienced depression and suicide ideation. Wow. And I'd never heard of that before. I'd never seen it in my father before. Looking back now, I see the signs growing up. So my dad would get angry all the time at just the most stupidest shit, like just random stuff. And now I know that that's a coping mechanism of mental health, perhaps. And but I sat down with my dad over a period of time and started talking about him and what he had experienced and everything. It was like I was looking at myself, and it was galvanizing. It galvanized our relationship because it allowed us to find that bridge, which helped us better understand each other. And it allowed us both to become good mates, my best mates. And my old man would have never called me. He never really, maybe once a month, he might call me, during my 20s. But off the back of that, I speak to Dad probably twice a week now on the phone. He'll call me, I'll call him. So that's really brought our relationship together. So the biggest things I learned through that was, treating my father as a mate, not necessarily as a dad, and understanding his perspective on things and coming to terms with that and accepting that and forgiving my father as well. Not that he did anything wrong, but I certainly carried a lot of shit with me through my life. Yeah. And that process allowed me to better understand, his position. So if anything, mate, that's a really great outcome, a really strong positive of what I had to go through, which has brought my father and I really close together. It's amazing, but unfortunately it could have been a tragedy, and I had to get to that point to come through it to get to where we are now, but it's obviously brought us close together. So that's a good thing.
That's really cool, man. Happy for you.
Yeah. Thanks, mate. Yeah.
I guess like the last questions about your story, we talked about you feeling like a burden, and obviously like because of that drug abuse and not wanting the people you love to know that you were this footy player who's now abusing drugs. Did like the loss of identity as a football player attribute to that at all?
Yeah, it did massively because growing up, mate, all I knew was how to kick a footy, handball, football. I do a lot of corporate speaking, and one of the parts of the thing I talk about at the start is I say, look, if I was to give blood tomorrow, there'd be little footies floating around. It's just been a big part of who I am. Like I remember the youngest I remember is in the paddocks at home on the farm with a star post in the ground with PVC pipe over it acting as goals, and my old man and I out there before dinner and in the morning before school kicking goals, teaching me how to kick. So it's been a part of me, mate, for so long. And when you become a professional athlete and someone, you go from loving a game to living and breathing it, because it's your income, it's your identity, it's everything who you are. And I lived that for a really short period, and I was what you consider to be an insurance player. I wasn't the first picked every week. So I felt like I had to work harder than most.
Okay.
And in order for that to happen, people would say to me, Jake, you should be doing study outside, get ready for life after footy. But as a 19, 20-year-old male, who I was at the time as an insurance player, I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that, because I've got one opportunity to become an AFL player for as long as I can. I don't want any distractions of study. I just want to play football. And that was my conflict with that, So all I wanted to do was make the most of the time that I had. And during that process, mate, you're wearing a football jumper the entire time. So even with family and friends, the conversations I'd have would be, how much can you bench press? Can you even eat chocolate? And like everywhere you'd go, you'd sit around corporate environments and corporates sit next to you who you've never met before in your life. And these guys are millionaires that are sponsors of the clubs, and they think they're your coach, so they're telling you how you should play, what you're not good at. And it's just the whole world you live in. Is you really are in a bubble, and it is a nice little bubble, mate, while it's there. And I had a lot of great opportunities, and I've lived. We got to go to South Africa with Carlton for a couple of weeks, which is absolutely amazing. And I've been around the world with footy stuff and that. So I've had great opportunity, but off the back of that, losing that identity was a big part of who I was, and when I got delisted and my name didn't get called out in the draft, 2 months later for the Western Bulldogs, I could basically go through a list now, mate, of all the names I haven't heard of since. There's no phone call from the football clubs. Even still to this day, I've never received a phone call from Carlton, from the Western Bulldogs, from the AFL, from the AFLPA. No one wants to know you. You're completely used and abused. And in my position, as I didn't get the opportunity to retire, so it wasn't on my terms. So I didn't get the best and fairest speech. I didn't get the car around the oval and waving goodbye. It was a bitter experience. I was a victim. I blamed football. I went through a lot of those issues with, how could it, that type of thing. And that's what really, I guess, stepped me into that abusive stage of my life, because I was a cyclone, mate. I just come in, mess shit up, leave. Everyone else had to pick it up and pick the pieces up. And a big part of that was losing my identity as a footballer.
Yeah, that is really hard, especially not having someone reach out to you from those sort of organisations and those teams, because it's pretty much saying you're not good enough anymore and we only really wanted you because of that identity. So I can understand why you sort of went to those depths.
Yeah, you do, and you get upset, mate. You get really down on it. And I mean, I'm someone who went through my own mental health illness through that period as well. The everyday punter is, even for them, that's difficult, And you combine that with perhaps what I was experiencing, it magnifies it even more. And when I finished my career, what happens is here in Australia, you get flown around the country to try and reserve grade football, try and get you to come play for them. Yeah. The Sandful, the Waffle, the Quaffle, they fly you around the country. So for the next 4 months, mate, I was just flying everywhere and just partying for weekends and weekends all the time. And every year you play AFL footy, you get 15 grand put aside for you in a retirement fund. And 12 months after you finish, you get a lump sum of cash that comes into your account. So I had, on top of the money I had in there already, I had another 60 grand come into my account 12 months after the game. And, it's party time. You know what I mean? I'm not employed. I don't need to be, because I got over $100,000 in my account. And I'd gone to Vegas. Everything with mate was just a write-off, because I was pissed off at the world. And that's just a byproduct, mate, of where I got myself to.
Man, damn. Obviously knowing all the work you've done on yourself since the attempt, and now what you're doing with outside the locker room and Speak Clothing, how would you, I guess, is there any advice for someone who's transitioning from one phase of their life, from one identity to another?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have to think about that one. the only bit of advice I think I would give is that one thing that I've certainly learned through outside the locker room is that early on I didn't have all the answers, and I think that was a really good strength of mine. I kind of went into it unknown,
Yeah.
and I wasn't aware of the boundaries. And I think sometimes some of us get fearful of the unknown and they're scared of what could happen, and that's what might hold us back from making change. And I think that it's a really powerful thing to look at it in a different direction as to, well, this is actually a really exciting time, and the fact that I don't know everything is a really good thing, because I've been able to create outside the locker room, and it's molded over 4.5 years. What it was when I first started to what it is today is really different, and that's not a bad thing. It's a really good thing. So the only bit of advice I would give is to people just to get in and get going and get started, because good things can come from ideas that seem so simple, and then over time they can really build momentum and then you realise that you should have started it long before you actually did. So. Yeah, definitely get into it and get going.
Yeah, I can 100% resonate with that, bro. Because, oh, hello, you there? Right.
She cut out. I wasn't looking at the power.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, just before we cut out, I was just going to say, like, because you're talking about how you jumped into outside the locker room without really knowing, and I can resonate with that, and I'm sure you've had the same thing. It's like jumping into something to do with mental health, people telling you shouldn't be doing that because you don't have the qualifications.
Yeah, you know what to say to that?
What?
Can I swear on your podcast?
Yeah.
Fuck off.
That's
Basically,
gold.
mate, there's no look, obviously there's a place, mate, for clinical advice and clinical things like that, but you would agree, mate, you and I don't come from a place as if we know everything. You and I have come from a place of it's lived, we understand, and through my experience, mate, the connectability and the rapport that you and I can build with the person going through mental health, in my experience, outweighs clinical reach, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So yeah, don't listen to them, mate. Keep doing what you're doing. No, that's pretty simple.
Pretty passionate about that one.
Yeah, no, I just look. Unfortunately, mate, I hear it as well, and I heard it very early on with everything, and yeah, I guess it doesn't matter what you do, what good you try and do in the world with things and that, mate. You're gonna have people just are just miserable, and they want, for some reason, they just want to bring people down and make them feel like shit, and you just don't associate yourself with people like that, and you realise pretty quickly that, mate, there's some good people out there. So
Okay.
yeah.
A few wrap up questions, and then yeah, I'll wrap up. Uh, Knowing everything that you've been through, working so hard to become a footy player, and then going through depression, anxiety, losing that, and then losing your identity, the drug abuse, and then the attempt, and then now being this person in a position with so much influence in the mental health space in Australia, what would you say the quality of your life is like now?
Yeah, it's a great question. One thing I always say again, mate, you've asked a lot of good questions today. Well done. I'm very,
Oh, thank you.
very, I'm very impressed, mate. It's actually one of the better podcasts, mate, to be honest with you, I've had. So the quality of my life today, I'm still challenged with mental health. Like, I'm not cured with depression. I still go through really tough times. And what's enabled me to really stay on top of it is a lot of things we spoke about earlier through those coping mechanisms, and that game of golf I play every week, and staying on top of my diet, my fitness, and my journal and stuff like that. So those are things that are ongoing challenges, mate. But overall, my quality of life is really positive. Like, I'm really happy. I'm engaged, so I'm getting married at the end of this year, and I've got I've got great support people around me and friends. I've got a great team with outside the locker room, but got some new exciting things coming up into the future, which are all in line with the mental health space, but doing more campaign work in different areas. So, mate, I'm really happy. I really am.
Lost you on the audio, brother.
How's that?
Yep.
You back in? All right,
Yep.
that's all right. We'll go again. Yeah, no, look, I'm just recapping that, mate. I was just saying, look, my quality of life is really good, and I'm getting engaged at the end. I'm engaged, sorry. I'm getting married at the end of the year, and good family, good
Yes.
friends. My fiance and I have just bought a house, which is where I am today. Normally, I'm at the office, but I got training tonight, so I'm still involved in community sport, and I like to think, mate, that I'm making change every day, and that'll be ongoing, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you need to think that at all. It's exactly what you're doing. It's making
Yeah.
change.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's hard, like people on the outside look in and say, "Oh, you must be really proud and everything," and I am. Don't get me wrong, I really am. And sometimes I do need to pinch myself, and it is great. But I think it's that athletic mind thing again, like that I keep coming back to. I just think it's something that I look at and go, "Okay, I am proud, I'm happy, but what's next?"
Yeah.
It's on to the next challenge. It's who else is going to say to me I can't do something, and then it's kind of moving on to that challenge. So you don't spend too long, admiring. You kind of look at it and say, "Yep, this is great, really happy." But what more can we do, and how can we make it better?
Cool.
Because there are still a lot of kids, mate, that have fallen through the cracks, and especially through our scholastic system over here in Australia, we've got a lot of challenges in that area, and there's a lot of kids that are very creative, and not every kid's sporty like me, and a lot of kids that are very creative and musical they're not connecting. There's a lot of things in the schools and that are not working for these kids. So there's a lot of challenges out there, mate.
Yeah, I'm glad you're tackling them, man.
Yeah, one at a time. Yeah.
What have you added to your life or removed from it to improve the quality of it?
Well, the obvious one is drugs. Through that experience, which is Captain Obvious there. Look, I still have a beer every now and then.
Yeah.
I was obviously very sober for a lot of years, but over the last couple of years, I've been able to integrate it back into my life, and that's only because I've obviously of the advice of my clinical team and my people around me, and I'm very balanced now. I've got good people, my fiance and stuff like that, so I don't have any triggers that could set me off, but I have plans around that. So the amount of consumption, when I consumption, those type of things. I've got what we call an alcohol plan. So I've removed a lot of those things, but also being able to bring them back in, which in my opinion is more empowering when you're in a position to be able to mentally take control and not have anything ever again. What else have I brought into it? I think I've mentioned her already, but certainly my partner, my fiance plays a really integral role. For someone who lives with someone with a mental health illness can be a very frustrating experience, especially when you're getting to know them, because she comes from a family where it's not common. She hadn't seen it, and she had to do a bit of a crash course, in understanding how to support someone, how to identify, and it is quite selfless in her behalf too, So she's been quite phenomenal in supporting me as well, mate. But yeah, those are probably the couple of things I'd say. Top of my head, I'm sure there's heaps more, but I can't think of any
That's awesome, man.
right now. Yeah.
And shout out to the missus too. Well,
Yeah.
my one's been through the exact same, man. Even just yesterday, I had a little bit of a meltdown where I didn't want to talk about nothing or use none of the coping mechanisms that I talk about.
Yeah. Well, what are yours? So it's funny because her and I, we still hit heads sometimes, and I do that. I close up, and she wants me to talk more about work and stuff like that. But I come home from work, the last thing I want to talk about is work, and it's a very frustrating thing at times. So I'd be interested to know how you cope with that.
With the coping, usually for me, it's like a cold shower, just to
Yeah,
sort of snap me straight out of thinking about it.
that'll do it.
Focus on the breathing, then like obviously breathing's one of them, or meditation is probably the one that works best for me. But even like when I'm in that state, I'm just resistant to anything she suggests.
It's funny, isn't it? Like I know it's challenging because there's a part of your brain that just doesn't want to give in.
Yeah.
And yeah, so what that does is, mate, it really humanises it too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For me, it does anyway. It makes you realise that, hang on a minute, mate, you're not ahead of where you thought you were. your Jake Edwards and you still battle. And she brings me down, mate, pretty quickly, which is a good thing, I guess.
Okay, last question, brother. If you had a chance to put a message on a billboard where you know thousands of people would see it, what would that message be?
Oh, what would that message be on a billboard? Look, I hate to steal other people's campaign work and what they do and that, but without me being creative on my own terms, there are a lot of great programs and initiatives out there that I'll just throw some along the way. Like the guys that live in with Sam Webb and stuff like that, what they do, It Ain't Weak to Speak, all those type of things. Are You OK Day? There's a lot of stuff that can be relatable to mental health. As we know today, with a lot of the campaign work supporting people to speak up is always a good path to take. But I mean, myself personally, mate, I'm not too sure. Honestly, I'll probably have to have a think about that a little bit more and get back to you. I'm certainly more of a deep thinker when it comes to those type of things. But if I looked at the slogans that we have with outside the locker room, things like it's more than just a game, which is obviously focusing on more than playing a game of sport. There's more to it. The Speak clothing stuff, we talk about designed for a purpose. A lot of these things you can take and put into your own life. Yes, it's a clothing label, but designed for a purpose could mean your goals, your ambitions, whatever it is you want to get out of your own life. So I'm sure we could brainstorm some good ones there, mate, and come up with a really good one. But there's a lot of great campaign work out there, mate, that I'm sure would be probably better represented on a billboard than my ideas.
That's awesome, bro. To wrap up, I just want to acknowledge you for, first of all, taking the time to do this. Swings and roundabouts trying to get here, but thank you so much, man. I know how busy you are. And then secondly, for going through everything that you've been through. Like, your story is pretty powerful and profound, and the fact that you've come out the other side, you're now using your lessons, turning pain into power and inspiring others to step into their power and find their voice, man. It's profound, and I'm absolutely grateful that someone like you is doing this.
Yeah, thanks, mate. That means a lot. It really does. For someone in the industry itself, we're all about respect, and I think the role that even yourself is playing with the podcast, mate, and the work that you're doing plays a really integral part to reaching a different geographic and demographic of people, mate, that I'm sure along the way you're supporting and encouraging people to open up. So well done to you too, lot. Good work.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. Yeah,
thanks,
mate.
Night, eh? You too. Speak soon.
Cheers, Jake.
See you, buddy.